Hello and welcome back to the group chat with your boy Errol and
Marcel.
Marcel, yes, I'd say we're in the building, but quite clearly, as you can see,
we are next to the building.
We're next to the building at the moment. And today, you know, it's a lovely day, but it's kind of a weird one at the same time, in the sense that at the moment it's various lockdowns across the world for COVID-19. You know, there's been a pandemic which has resulted in the last 3 months essentially people being put under some sort of, it's not house arrest, but it's pretty locked down, it's very restrictive, and this is probably the first week that those rules and regulations have kind of been lifted. But in the midst of all this, there's been a lot of other stuff going on in and around the world, really, and I think obviously the prevalence of social media now kind of highlights things, and things kind of get sparked and go very viral. So today I think we're quite fortunate to be joined by Margaret, and I'll let you do the introductions there, really, but from my perspective you can kind of go in, introducing, and then we'll delve into it.
Anybody not familiar with us is probably looking, thinking skate park, two young black lads and that's a little old white lady, but we've got here Nanny Margs, and anybody who follows me on Instagram or has done for a while will definitely have seen I like to wind it up. It's my nan. I like to wind it up on various videos.
Yeah, absolutely.
So today, we're blessed to have Nanny Margs company.
Well, I'm quite glad that we've kind of got your company, Marg, and you've been a part of my life as long as I've been Marcel's mate, so it's pretty much day one, and you know, you consider me a grandson, I consider you, you know, a second nan in that respect. But today we kind of wanted to have a discussion and an outlook on what I believe is the real virus in society, and it's racism in my mindset. I kind of just want to give people a bit of a timeline to hopefully create a bit of context as to where my thought process has been coming from for the last couple of weeks, potentially, just so people have a bit more of an understanding, to say that some of the things that have happened aren't just a knee-jerk reaction. There has been what might seem like isolated incidences. Quite clearly there's a pattern that's emerged, and those patterns have led into a bit of a domino effect. So in February the 23rd this year in Georgia, America, a former cop and son chased a suspicious looking black male through a predominantly white neighbourhood, and they proceeded to shoot him, and he killed the gentleman. Now, there was no arrests originally made in this instance, and the Attorney General first tried to push it under the rug, as she had a personal tie with the individual, the perpetrator of this offence. Will Smith is quoted by saying that racism isn't getting worse, it's getting videoed now, and I think that's one thing that stuck with me. So this is back in February, so this is initially the start of a lockdown period, that even within this whole lockdown that we're about to enter into, these kind of activities were happening, and it's pretty much a modern day lynching. From that, a month later, there is a Breonna Taylor. She was in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, I went to Louisville in Kentucky in 2010, and it is obviously the South. It's the South of America, and it's the Southern Belt, it's that Christian belt of America. But there's still a big black community down there. She was murdered on the 13th of March. She was shot 8 times, unarmed, in bed, because the police was raiding the property, and they raided the wrong property. They've admitted it, and there's been no arrests since then. This has only really come to light recently because of the other events that I'm going to kind of timeline again. Now, and this is what's happened. So in my mind, if these two events have happened in the last month in America, the American people, for the most part, if it's on social media and stuff, they're aware that these incidences are happening. And then you get a woman like Amy Cooper. Now, this is the lady that was in New York. Now, a black man, Christian Cooper, he advised this lady that her dog needed to be on a leash because he was in a very specific area within the park, which basically states all dogs must be on a leash whilst in this area. So now he's informed her of that. She's decided to invoke a higher authority and intervene, and used her defences. I'm going to call the cops, and I'm going to tell them that there's an African American man threatening my life. Now, in my thinking, I'm thinking from this, well, I don't kind of get it. How can you see all the stuff that's been going on and still think that's an appropriate thing to do at that point in time, weaponising your race against another black man to make sure that he is kind of put in his place, or basically known that his life is worth less than yours because you know the system and how to play it, to make sure that he isn't able to tell you what to do, whether it's right or wrong.
You know the police are going to respond quicker based on the fact he's black.
Exactly. And then finally, last week, George Floyd, Minneapolis, USA, Officer Derek Chauvin, he was accompanied by 3 other officers. They'd already detained George in the back of the van before they had pulled him out, and then he'd kept the handcuffs on him, and then he proceeded to kneel. Well, the Officer Derek has proceeded to kneel on his neck for upwards of 8 minutes. And now, it can be seen by all bystanders, it can be seen and heard on camera that he's basically asking and pleading for his life as he struggles to breathe. So my thing now is I'm sat with you guys and I've kind of just timelined. Most often when you have these kind of conversations, people say, oh yeah, but it happened so far back.
People like to justify.
And you want to come up with a reason.
City actions.
But this has all happened in such a short space of time.
Well, there's many more. I think it's at a point now, it's the straw that broke the camel's back.
Absolutely.
So, one incident is one incident too many.
Yeah.
But it's happening, and as you say, it's being filmed more and more often. It's bringing it to the surface, and it's at a point where people are like, fuck this.
Yeah.
Like, enough is enough.
And I think, and it's right, and I get that frustration, so I understand when people say, what's the point in, at first I can understand why your initial reaction would be, why are you rioting, why are you, damaging the communities that you live in and X, Y and Z, and those businesses, they're only in turn hurting yourself and your community. I can understand why you would initially think that, but as I said, we're not reacting to isolated incidences. These, in the last 3 months or 12 weeks when the world is meant to be locked down and isolated, how can these people be allowed to get away with killing people in the streets, being videoed doing so, and no reasonable course of action and no justice afterwards? So I want to kind of bring you in here now, Marg, in the sense that you've obviously had black kids.
Yeah.
And
obviously.
Well, obviously, no.
The way you said it.
No, you've obviously, because you've
raised a black family.
You've raised a black family.
Yeah.
From when you was young, because this is one thing I struggle. How has that come about for you? That how have you dealt with people's reactions to the life choices you made when you was younger? How did other people in your community in Liverpool first take to that?
Well, I've got to admit, when I first brought my husband to meet my dad wasn't at all racist.
Okay, that's good.
Right away, he asked me, Dad, could we get engaged? My dad never questioned when I brought him in. First time he'd seen him, he never questioned anything about his colour. My dad said, yeah, of course you can. So in my family, my dad was never, ever racist.
So you always had that blessing then? So
yeah, I was very lucky, really.
I suppose in that sense that it's almost like family and community that kind of give you that first real confidence to kind of continue that relationship almost. If your dad wouldn't have approved, do you think you would have continued to see this man?
I think I would.
Yeah?
Yeah. I think I would have gone.
I know what she's like. She's set in her ways.
I would have gone on. But I mean, I didn't know what my dad's reaction was going to be, but there was no prejudice in him at all.
So did you see it from other people in the community at all when he was growing up as kids? Was ever they targets of racism? Was it a thing in school for them? What? Because that's what I'm trying to unpick.
Yeah,
really.
I know what you mean. I do remember one incident with my eldest boy, Mark. We lived by the Rockies at that particular time, and something had gone on down Lawrence Road, Ale Road, and my son was going down to meet one of his friends who lived down there, and the police stopped him and said to him, where are you going? He said, I'm just going to meet my friend. He said, there'd been some incidents, I think it was a bad incident, but anyway, where are you going? He said, I'm going to meet my friend. He said, where do you live? He said, I live by the Rockies.
Yeah.
And do you know what? They called him a lion. Black bastard.
Yeah.
And this is the truth. When he came home and eventually told me, the only thing is, he didn't take his number.
His badge number at the time?
No, didn't think of it. And when he came home, at that particular time, I had no proof.
So how did you feel as a mother then? How did that
Absolutely appalled, disgusted.
Rightfully so. This is what I don't get when, like, my thing now, people are feeling more outraged towards rioters than they are to the fact that this person was murdered, and I'm like, how can't you understand that it's not an attack for us, or I want to say us, it's anybody that's highlighting to you the injustice towards a group of people. That's the us. If anyone's highlighting that to you, how can you choose to disregard that purely based off the fact all of a sudden now these rioters, they've got no credibility anymore? Well, hang on a minute.
Let's not forget who's actually starting the riots. Key points. You'll be shown what they want you to see.
Absolutely. But even the media have been attacked by the police and all this.
Rightfully so. What you say? The media been attacked?
Yeah, they've been attacked by the police and all of this as well. I've seen videos of police officers firing bullets at the media journalists and stuff like that in turn.
I think one quote I always go by with anything of this nature: to actually look at and break down who wants a riot. Look who's come dressed for a riot. Now, someone with maybe a face mask on, dressed like me, ain't gonna last 2 minutes next to officers with riot shields and padding and armour.
Yeah.
They're the people that want the riots. These are the people that are stepping out of line, breaking windows and jumping back on their own side, riling the people up to provoke the incident.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you won't see this. It's, in my mind, I don't know if I'm doing a little bit of reading, George Floyd was seen as quite an inspirational black man.
In his community, yeah.
Yeah. He was a positive role model for a lot of people.
Respectively in his community.
And he was doing his bit to kind of improve people's lives.
Oh, not even
he wanted to break that. He wanted to get his message. Yeah, he wanted to get his message across within the communities, and given the circumstances within the first. This is my own take on it, but why were the police called for this man writing a false check that was not actually false?
I don't know.
Now, it's not just my own opinion of it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is the case. I've read more than one article where people are basically saying, with the pull that this man had within the community,
yeah,
was it an attack on him purposely, knowing that he had maybe the power to change 1% of people's minds? Because it's so senseless.
Can speculate, yeah.
Why was this man being arrested for writing a bad check? He wasn't writing a bad check, so he was arrested for nothing, still detained. And yet there's still no justice for it.
And ultimately he was killed.
Yeah.
Now, have you seen the video, Margaret? I don't know if you on social.
Horrific. Absolutely.
For me, this leads me to kind of my next point. I've watched on social media these things unfold, and you know, even in Manchester there was an incident at the start of the month, last in May, that I had seen again on social media. And as a young black man in the 20s, I do constantly get reminded by, whether it's viral videos or stuff like that, it's kind of like an algorithm that'll just force out police brutality videos on people of colour, and it's kind of an echo chamber that constantly goes around. So I kind of referred to that in a Facebook post that I did last week, and it wasn't a post to kind of tar anybody with any particular brush, or basically say, you know, this is a problem that needs to be addressed and picked up by a specific set of people within any community. From my perspective, it was an opportunity for me as a black man to say, I've been watching these things, and within my timeline and my feed, I see people of colour also note and reference these incidences. At the moment, I'm not currently seeing the same from people who would identify themselves as white people on my timeline. It's not to say that they aren't seeing it, but they're not then showing any sort of visible outrage in the same way that they post their Instagram meal that they had, or the lovely walk that they went on, or the meme of the day that they've been pushing. So for me, it's about sharing the same energy on certain things. And when I then had watched, as I said to you at the top of the podcast, the first instance in February getting pushed back, a couple of weeks later now they're finally arresting people. The second instance where the Breonna Taylor, no one's been arrested yet. The first instance where they're in New York Park and she's fired and she loses her job. And then the fourth instance where a man's killed and they've knelt on his neck for 9. I've watched all this for a month and not said anything, and sat on it until the other day. I thought, nah, I can't sit on this no more. So my whole thought process thereafter was, I know that the black people in and around my community, or the people that I know, understand and see this. I'm hoping that if I ask the question to people that don't identify as visibly black, will they respond in the same way, and will they receive outrage? Now, ever since, on my Facebook, when I look, black, white, yellow, pink, doesn't matter what they are, there's all these sorts of posts about outrage. Now, I'm not saying I've sparked that, But just because now I'm seeing it circulated within my social bubble, it makes me feel like people are actually responding and there's something going on, staring underneath. And it wasn't an aim, it wasn't a thinly veiled dig at anybody, because I just love people. As I say, your nan's clearly, you know, a white lady. My family, half of my family are all white, do you know what I mean? We both grew up in a predominantly white area of Liverpool.
Yeah.
What holds us all together is the Scouse thing and us being Liverpool, and I think that was the next point I wanted to lead on. So from you now having 3 kids, in what kind of generation are we talking? The 60s, 70s?
Yeah.
70s?
60s. Mark was born, my first child was born in 1960.
What was everything like thereafter then? What was there like getting into adult life then? What was there like trying to apply for jobs and getting onto the housing ladder and all that kind of stuff? Did they ever share any kind of moments where they just felt... Because I want to basically see... I feel like anyone of a certain generation will always say it's got better.
It hasn't.
No, I don't think it's got better. I've got to be honest.
Why? Well, why though? Why do you not think it's got better? Because I can only speak for the last 28 years. And in my lifetime, I can see... Do you know what I mean? So why do you think it's not got better?
Not got better. I was on a bus, well, obviously before all this lockdown, about, say, 3-4 months ago. I'm sitting on a bus and there's a child with, I assume, the grandmother. And she, I think it was she, shouted, "Oh, look, there's 2 niggers." They were walking, 2 black people were walking, and I went, "Oh, I don't believe what I've just heard."
Did you say something to her then?
Yeah, I said, "I don't believe what I've just heard."
And what was her response?
Ignored. She ignored. Yeah. She ignored. I said, "I don't believe in this day and how can you possibly let a child shout that?"
Yeah. But again, this is like.
And nobody else on the bus said anything.
Well, that was one of.
This is.
Nobody said anything, and don't believe that nobody else heard it.
Well, that's my point. I feel like, and that's I think a watershed moment for me out of all of this. I think if there's any real learning, and I'm not trying to preach and I'm not trying to be high and mighty, because I don't feel like anyone has got any moral high ground when it comes to this kind of conversation. I think racism crosses all borders. Generally, that casual racism is amongst every community, whether you're, you know, Asian against Filipinos, whether you're Indian against Bangladeshi, whether you're Chinese against Vietnamese, blacks against whites, mixed race against blacks. It's across all borders, and I am first to accept that casually. The systemic racism, though, it's a tool that's placed within a structure and it's a system, and ultimately my thinking is the majority of conscious people of any colour are aware that the hierarchies and the patriarchies that have set up the Western society are ultimately responsible for that system. And until enough of those people that identify with how that looks, whether you think that's visually white or whether it's actual positions of power within particular buildings or offices, until you visibly challenge those patterns that have come before, we're never going to beat the cycle of racism, in my opinion.
No, you won't. I've got people, friends, so-called friends, I've met up with. School friends, actually. And when I'm in conversation, we used to meet for like a pensioners' afternoon, so to speak. And one of them said one day, now they know quite well my children are black.
Yeah.
And she goes, "Oh, you know, we go to the package shop." I said, "You what?" She went to the package shop in front of me. I said, "How dare you say that?" I said,
I know you never said it as politely as that.
No, I didn't. I didn't. I said,
well, what did you say then? What did you actually say?
No, I didn't swear. No, I didn't swear. No. I said, "How dare you say that?" I said, "Would you call my children niggers?" And she went, "Oh no." I said, "Well, why did you call a Pakistani a person the package shop?" She said, "We always have done." I said, "Well, isn't it about time that you stopped it?"
But that's a great intervention, though, because you've challenged her.
At least you've made her realise.
Exactly, and you've challenged her previous ignorances that she wasn't aware of.
Well, even so, on the same table, they know I've got a gay grandson. And one of them said, "You know, the queer." And I went, "Again? Jesus
Gene.
Jesus being named.
It's just been named and dropped in this, you know. It's people, but that's the, I was thinking that that's the next point for me then, like, in the light of a situation like this that can happen, how do those affected, whether you're affected because you visibly identify with the victims in the circumstance of the individuals that lose their life, or you identify because your grandchildren are, or you've got friends, or you just genuinely care about humanity and you don't see colour as a dividing issue, how do you then articulate to the powers that be genuine change needs to happen now? Because we've had sports people, we've had people use their platforms and try to use their platforms in a way that says, all right, well, I will protest this way visibly, and they've been criticised and abused and heckled, and they've lost their jobs and not been able to carry on their way of life because of the way they chose to protest. But then if we actively riot and loot and set fire to things and just watch society fall apart in front of us, you get criticised for that. I am not saying I've got the answer.
I would say ultimately the end goal is education.
Yeah.
So going back to that there, challenging somebody, I know you will have experienced similarly to me, what we would call a racist incident, but it's not necessarily an aggressive racist incident. Yeah. And what I mean by that is gollywog, or oh yeah, you got wog hair like you, and these people.
Or can I touch your hair? Those little moments.
Up until the 60s, we had petting zoos for black people.
Shit,
like,
bro,
that's not right.
Yeah.
So, although it's not necessarily meant in a bad way, so to speak, or an aggressive manner, it's a very uneducated thing to make a comment like that. And I know in my own cases where, say, woghead or gollywog, something like that has been said, and people who are fine with me, they've got nothing against me
as a person. Yeah,
but just by me saying, or another one is half caste, and by me replying to that with you can't say that, and kind of making light of it, not that I don't think it's a serious issue, but rather than jumping on my high horse and fitting the stereotype that they believe I'm going to fit for being black and being aggressive, and, you know, is it because I'm black? Yeah. More making people feel basically like a dickhead for saying it, but at the same time educating. Like, you can't say, like, you know, there's actually a history behind that. Like, go do some reading on it.
Well, that was the thing.
And that, with some people, is people who are actively racist, sometimes that's enough to make them think, ah, shit, yeah, I get what he is. Because a lot of it's through ignorance. They don't realise, they're not saying it because they know there's any meaning behind it. Yeah, they're saying it because
they don't realise, do they?
That's a generational thing. They've probably heard the parents who've heard their parents who were around at a time.
But then for them, in their mind, ignorance is bliss. So they don't want to be. They don't want to be. We're going to feel like people always, or people that want to tap into that experience of a black individual or the black mindset or the psyche. They'll always ask you for your experiences of it, or what's happened to you, what kind of racist events have happened to you in your life. But I feel as if now we're in a point where the accounts of the black community are far-reaching. They're all over the world, and incidents happen in America, and overnight we understand it in Liverpool on the ground as what happened, as if we was almost there. So you can do your own research now, and I feel like people can clue themselves up and figure out why we put ourselves in the kind of the box that, not box, I wouldn't say we box ourselves in, but why we put ourselves in the default position we do, based on the conditions that have led us to this point. Almost
we've experienced it ourselves.
Yeah, so we don't have to explain
it. This is why we feel it. Okay, on a much lesser level, we've been stopped growing up as kids for no reason other than being black. Yeah, 100%. Let's not sugarcoat it. Two of us walking down the road from A to B, not loitering, not causing anybody any harm. Yeah. We're stopping you under a section 30 because there's two of you in a group. Now, two people, I don't care what it is. It's not a group. It's not a group, it's two people walking down the street.
It's a pair.
We've been stopped in bigger groups of mixed backgrounds, and we have literally been selected out. We want to speak to you, and you. You're okay. Now, maybe it's coincidence, I think not, but the three that they want to speak to are the three black kids, and they have literally separated black and white, spoke to us, stopped and searched us, whilst white kids are over the road. I don't say it like that. White kids, our friends, who we are in a group as part of, are not searched.
Absolutely. I think my biggest example of that was probably I used to work in town, and I was going towards Matthew Street to start working in a bar job, and it was, as I say, there was just me and another lad, both black lads, walking, and now I can see that the police have got one of those metal detectors for knives, so they've clearly got an operation going on, but that's veering to the left down Matthew Street, and I was going past the Met Quarter towards my job at the time. So in my head, I've got no real reason to walk out of my way to take part within your police operation and exercise. Therefore, as you're a public servant and I'm paying taxes and working, I'm going about my business. I don't have to entertain whatever yous have got going on. They've then come over to me, one of the young ones, and basically asked me where am I going. I've told them I'm on my way to work. So I've answered your question. If you choose not to believe that I'm on my way to work, or if you believe that I'm on my way to work, you've got no suspicion that I'm up to no good. You've got no suspicion that I'm carrying a knife, because if you were doing your job, you'd take me off face value and you'd believe that I was going to work. But you chose not to believe me at the time, and you told me that it was the law, that I had to divert myself from my original path to this metal detector just so the police could confirm that I was not carrying a weapon and I wasn't a threat to nobody. And at this point, I've kind of just met it with resistance and just been like, it's not happening. Like, I am not going through that metal detector, because I'm not going that direction. Had I been going that direction, yeah, I would have participated, but I'm not. So in about, a minute of this kind of back and forth going on, this young officer kind of signals over to a sergeant, and the sergeant comes over and he speaks to me in a more, obviously he's a bit more of an authoritarian, he's kind of got that kind of level of, I'm going to speak to you now, kind of, and sit you down. He just says, look, this is why we're doing it. And I said,
They're watching.
I know they're watching, aren't they? No, I kind of said to them at the time, I understand why you're doing it, but from my perspective, can you understand why I am not taking part? And he said, look, I understand why you're not taking part. That's fair enough. What can I do then? Can I search you now? Would you be happy to? So because I was trying to prove a point, and don't get me wrong, this is 8 o'clock at night, Liverpool 1's just closing, people are walking past.
Yeah.
So all in the mindset of everybody else walking past now must be, what have those two lads done? What's he done for those police to have stopped?
He's made an example out of it.
And they've made an example. So I can speak on experiences all day long, and you can never convince me that.
Even now, I can think of, to briefly go over, we've been waiting for a bus.
Yeah.
And police have pulled over. We've had an incident in town. Now, that's not a very specific thing. Town's a big place.
Yeah.
And you fit the description of it.
Yeah.
And I'll let you very briefly.
Well, yeah, long story short, basically, a kid must have been, someone attempted to rob him. This is when he was about 17. He must have attempted to rob this one kid, and he ran off with his phone or whatever, and then the police were in the area. But the irony, well, I wouldn't even say the irony, the situation basically happened in January. So as you know, it's 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, it's pitch black. So this then young white lad who's very clearly shaken up, and he's just been, targeted, has been asked to identify any particular potential suspects. So we were sat in, the McDonald's that night for a good 4 or 5 hours. We're on CCTV, we're there. We haven't left this particular seating area for over 2 hours. By the time we've come to leave the area and go, police have bumped into us and said, this situation's just happened. We just basically want to stop your searches and make sure you have not got anything on you, and you'll be on your way. So because that's how they set up the conversation, we just obliged. We were 17. We didn't really think he was overstretching. We didn't think he was taking the piss. We didn't think that he was way without the.
Well, looking back now, there has been an incident, and you fit the description.
Yeah.
So basically, somebody black has committed a crime, and we're stopping you.
Yeah.
Because there's no other way of wording that.
Yeah,
you're being stopped for being black.
And long story short, the kid basically then looks at 10 o'clock at night, looks halfway down the road and identifies one of the group. And I got arrested, spent the night in a cell. My mum had to come and pick me up the next day. I was in is it St Anne's? Is it? Yeah. Police station. In this little box glass cell, and just there as an example. And I told my mum when she came into that cell, I said, don't stop crying, because for me, you letting them see you cry means they've got to us, and they haven't got to me, because I know I haven't done nothing wrong. And as far as I'm concerned, I'll be quite happy to back up my version of events with facts and evidence of CCTV with other people's accounts. So when it comes to a case type situation, they'll never be able to convict me of this because it was not me, I wasn't there. And as soon as I kind of said that to my mum kind of just gave me one of those looks as if to say, you tell me the God's gospel truth and, you know, I've got your back and support you no matter what. And I told her the truth. And that was, you know, that was the be all and end all of it, really. I think they did an investigation and then squashed it. But even in those moments, as a 17-year-old, you kind of just comply and go along with it. But you don't really until you kind of reflect and look back and just think how much of a piss take it actually is.
Yeah.
So we're seeing riots and protests across the US of A, Germany, the UK as well at the moment. There'll be protests probably for the next week now, and people are just doing these kneeling protests and hopefully having peaceful protests. I don't think, you know, I think everyone will say they won't condone the violence and the rioting and the looting, but how many times can people keep saying the same thing and getting ignored before they do something else, would be my question.
Well, the way it's portrayed, it's wrong. Attacking small businesses that have played no part in any event,
Yeah.
that serves no purpose. You're attacking your own, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because black, white, anything, you know, whether or not you are united or apart, we're all in the shit together. We're all at the bottom. Those being attacked and those doing the attacking. We're all basically attacking each other whilst those responsible are
Getting
sat
away
back,
with it.
Yeah.
laughing like, look at these
idiots. And this is my point where does Liverpool fit into all of this? And, you know, my thing is, given the backdrop of the COVID situation and the pandemic, as I've already said, I get why people might think one isolated incident to spark these riots is an isolated reaction, but it isn't. This has happened in a time of isolation, and as I've already said, it is a modern day lynching. We as Scousers, people from Liverpool, that's what we identify as. Our name we given to ourselves, it derives from the sailors and those that came and worked on the docks, and at the time they ate scouse, which was a common stew. All this stuff for us as our melting pot is dated as far back as the 1700s. Liverpool's been a port city with trade routes around the world, and it's meant that we've always had one of the most diverse communities. From the first time the Irish immigrants came over from the potato famine right up to the Windrush generation landed in 1948 and thereafter. So Liverpool, the people of Liverpool, we've all become this, we're all descendants of migrants effectively, and it has come with its challenges. We've had the city a capital of culture, you know, we've lost lives like Anthony Walker to racists and racism. We've also lost lives like Nazay to, you know, police brutality and being in police custody. But I think more than anything else, people can say COVID and, you know, Corona, there's a virus. I always will believe that racism is the genuine virus within our society. I believe also that all of our relatives are immigrants in one way or another, and in turn that's what bonds us as Scousers together. So these are just some things that I wrote down earlier today, and I just want people to think about, and people of all colours to just think about some of these things. It's been noted that black people are 26 more times likely to be stopped and searched by police than our white counterparts. In Oxford University, which is one of the best universities in the UK, black students only make up 1.9% of the student population. Blacks as a whole in the UK are about 3% of our population, but somehow we manage to make up 13% of the UK's prison population. There's a huge conversation that needs to happen about white privilege. I think it's a big conversation that I think black people have championed and will champion, with the fact that all lives matter, Black Lives Matter, those type of movements. But ultimately, I think that we as people, we can all do more. And like anything, it starts with education, as you said, and it starts with yourself.
It's passed down, you know. Anybody with a racist mindset at one point in life was not racist, and they may have heard parents, older siblings, other kids on the playground who've heard from their parents, they've heard a certain word, and they've took it for what it is, and dependent upon their upbringing, they've then grew up with that mindset that this is normal, it's acceptable. I think in educating people and trying to break that cycle, I think one way in which it could be done is educating people in schools. Now, I disagree with a lot of the school system because I think it's a load of shit, but how can you condense black history into 2 or 3 lessons?
Yeah.
Educating people. I can only comment on my own experience, and I can't imagine it's actually changed much. But if we're speaking on that, my experience in school, as far as a history class goes, we learnt about white history. As far as the history class went, black people's only contribution to history were slaves.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with the culture, the music, the fashion, everything that
was celebrated now.
Everything, by people of all backgrounds.
Yeah.
We're never credited for anything, and that's me speaking on it very vaguely.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
We're never credited for it. You were a slave, and being, say, maybe there was 2 or 3 non-whites in the class at the time I was at school, it was kind of like, you see the glances over. Like, you know the mindset of these people already. They're looking like, this applies to him. Like, this could have been his parents or his ancestors.
Yeah.
And they expect you to understand it because you're black.
Was there any sort of history lessons like that when you was in school? Or was it in the curriculum then at any point?
Never ever heard anything like that, no.
Do you think Liverpool's changed over the last... its attitude as a city? Do you think the city's become more tolerant? Do you think we celebrate diversity better now than we did in the 60s?
A bit better. Yeah, I admit a bit better. I think it's not as bad as... I was a teenager in the 50s, and I remember going to the dances, and I remember the black lads not being allowed in.
Yeah.
There was, and that is 1957, 58. There'd been some trouble the week before, and when the black lads, mixed race, everybody was mixed race years ago. Well, now, but they let all the white lads in, but the black lads couldn't come in.
That same shit still happens today though, and I had someone telling me the other day my experience of when I rock up to a club and I can go in, but when I come with me black mates they can't go in and stuff like that, and it's just it's bonkers. And to be in 2020 and as you say, Marcel, for all the things that we do celebrate about black culture now that people have learnt outside of school, so all the good things that are fed into people of all colours life, they picked up along the way. They picked up by the friends, they picked up by someone's cousin, they picked up by the music or something that they've seen on the TV, and they've absorbed it and they've taken what they like, but then they don't recognise the struggle that is in tandem with all those things that are happily celebrated.
Even, as you say, people picking up from the media. We have Black History Month.
1 month of the year,
Why are we choosing 1 month of the year
to celebrate?
To highlight that
the contributions.
Black people have a history too.
And they've made contributions to society.
Like, I think that's fucking insulting.
It is.
Because then anybody of any other background, it draws attention to the fact you're black. We are only celebrating your history because you're black, but not in a positive sense.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And I think like, that's what I mean. There's so much to talk about, and I feel like this kind of... We said when we started the podcast, we didn't want to just come, sit on a podcast, sit down and start talking about Liverpool's this city that's always been racist, because we could have easily said these things because there are experiences, but we wanted to celebrate all the other things and the good that have come from Liverpool. So initially, the podcast was 3 black lads, all freelance, independent people wanting to come together and highlight some of the sickest shit that goes on in Liverpool. Doesn't matter what colour you are doing it. We wanted to sit down and have a chat with you and just see what makes Scouse culture so vibrant and so attractive to people all over the world. Yeah. And we've done that, but we always said that we would still talk on these type of topics when it was appropriate to do so. So I think we couldn't skirt around it, and we couldn't kind of avoid this topic. And as I say, we are outside today. We've had to take that decision, and we're not in the studio in our usual settings, and we're trying to respect the whole social distancing and the current pandemic situation. But I feel better for just being able to talk to like-minded people about stuff like this, and I think if anything, hopefully this kind of conversation leads other people to have a conversation with their social bubble and start that conversation, because I think it always starts within us. We can't ask other people to give us the answers. Mark, what do you think about doing your first podcast?
Great.
Do you enjoy it?
Yeah, it's good. Got plenty more I can say.
We'll get it back for a part 2.
Well, we're going to have to get you back for part 2, and hopefully we'll get you in the building next time as well. But from my perspective, is there anything that you wanted to touch on? Because, again, I could go on all night, but I'm conscious.
We know Alan.
Again, really, I suppose it would just be more stories that we've already touched on.
Yeah.
Of our own accounts that I suppose are more personal to us. I can relate to that because it's things that I've seen firsthand, and I know all of us have got enough of them.
Yeah.
That we could share, or we could, as you say, we could be here for hours.
Just talking about stuff like that. But I think in a time like this, I think we just need to, hopefully people need to take a minute to just recognise that the reason for a lot of people, and I'm not trying to give them justification, but the reason that a lot of people have been so active in protesting and rioting in whatever form they have is because their previous attempts have been left unheard. And I think my quote from the other day was the one that I took from Martin Luther, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So I think we'll leave the podcast on that, and then to be fair, the last one, just in case anyone wants to accuse us, me personally, of being a little bit militant, it was Malcolm X that said, "It's not a chip on my shoulder, it's your foot on my neck."
It's very true.
Yeah.
So,
Can I add one little thing that happened?
of course you can.
Are you sure?
Go
No,
on.
this time. I was in work years ago, and this West Indian woman got put on the job that I was on. Jasmine come along and got put on this job, and this one next to me, she went, "Oh, I can't stand these." I said, "Oh, can't you?" I said, "I've got 3 of them at home."
I was waiting for it to drop down.
Oh, well, that's it. I love that. That's a great response to shut someone's racism down, though. But we'll definitely be back. We'll be trying to keep up with this little setup and see where it gets us. We'll hopefully get some guests back if they're up for, coming out and social distancing and doing a little podcast. But stay tuned. Keep your ears to the ground. Stay safe, people. As I say, I think, thoughts and prayers are with all of those that have been affected, not just the ones that we've named today, because the list goes on. Those over in the UK as well as those in the UK as well as those over in America. But it's been hosted by your boy
Marcel
and Errol, and this is the Group Chat. A nice one for watching.